I know a lot of you are rolling your eyes at this title, but I promise that although I am definitely being pretty clickbaity, I do mean that on some serious level. I have spent the last month now trying to write a video about how Attack on Titan works as a test of its readers, but in reality, what I found is that if Attack on Titan is a test, then the professor made up random content, threw it on the final exam, and everybody got an F. What was initially pretty clearly a class about philosophy and sociology randomly spun out into a class about natural history and human psychology in the last week that none of us were ready for. However, despite how confusing and disruptive to the initial structure of AOT this ending is, I actually kind of think it's maybe the best and only conclusion that Isayama ever could have come to. And to explain why that is, we should probably start with consulting the professor's notes. So as I'm writing this on June 6th, we're about like a month and some change out from when the writer of AOT, Hashime Isayama, gave us perhaps the most transparent insight into a writer's process that I have seen in a long time with this quote. We shall certainly return to more of this later in the video during our chill time segment when we're going to talk more about writing craft, but there's two things that we absolutely have to go over to understand the coursework of the Attack on Titan class. The first of which is Isayama's intention in writing this manga in the first place. Eren became a protagonist who committed mass slaughter on a scale rarely seen in other works of fiction. As for why I conceived such a story from the beginning, part of it was my desire to create a narrative with a major twist, where the victim becomes the perpetrator. To me, this portion of the quote means the absolute world in figuring out the mysteries of Isayama's coursework here. When he set out to write Attack on Titan, his goal was to create a character that essentially would go from hero to villain in our eyes. But importantly, he doesn't say hero and villain. He says perpetrator and victim. Those terms imply a certain degree of specificity. Instead of assigning a right and a wrong, they ask us to focus on who is the one doing an action and who is the one receiving that action. The connotation of perpetrator is, of course, negative, but the word isn't chosen to describe our attitude toward the main character. Then he would just say hero and villain, but instead it's to call attention to what is being done by them. To compare it to another anime, Death Note spoiler warning, I guess, skip ahead 10 seconds, Light Yagami goes from hero to villain. Isayama has taken care to say something else. So then the question becomes, what is the action Eren was a victim of that he will later perpetrate? The fall of Shiganshina is a viewing experience that I will never forget. I was still early into watching anime when I first saw it, and I remember I had to put down Attack on Titan for like a week after watching this first episode because I was so upset by it. One of the first and most important things that I think we need to remember from episode 1 is that Eren always wanted to be a scout. His mentality is really reframed after the attack on Shiganshina and losing his mom, and that kind of turns into his motivation. But he always wanted to go outside the walls and fight Titans. Even though the walls were safe, he was never okay with just staying there and being complacent. There was a world outside the walls that he wasn't allowed to explore, and he wanted to have that world no matter what the cost. This is when they constantly are using the phrase cattle to describe life within the walls. It's like they're pent up, waiting for the day that the Titans will pick them out, take them to slaughter, and eat them. And that's something that Eren cannot accept as his life. But the scouts at this point in time are not doing well. We see this mission early on in the episode, and later they come back into the city, and the forces are absolutely devastated. There's this kid in particular, Moses is his name. His mom comes up to the procession and asks where Moses is, and all that's left of him is part of his arm. Most of the rest of the scouts from the mission are dead. Many are wounded. And now there's this horrible scene playing out in front of all the people in the city who have come to watch. His mom, though, doesn't just break down in tears with the sadness of her son. She asks the commander of the scouts at the time to please tell her that her son did something for humanity, that his sacrifice meant something. But he can't do it because his sacrifice didn't mean anything at this point in time. He says, "We never learn a thing when we go outside the walls and fight these Titans. They've made no progress in freeing humanity from the walls and have only been slowly killed off. They don't even know what the Titans are at this point, much less how the walls got here or why this is happening to them." It's clear that at this point in time, based on his parents' reactions and the way people treat this idea, that Eren saying he wants to join the scouts is almost a suicidal ambition. But that's how much getting outside the walls means to him at this time. This is a thing, though, not just for him. Of course, Eren and Armin share this ambition to go out, find these secrets, and explore the world. Eren doesn't want to be confined, like we mentioned, and Armin wants the freedom to explore the world and learn all kinds of new things. But both are concerned that one day the wall will come down and humanity will be hopeless to fight back against the Titans. And it's exactly as Armin expresses that fear that Bertolt appears and knocks down Wall Maria. I think one of the things that Isayama is really incredible at doing that ends up being really important to the narrative of Attack on Titan is not just showing the scale of a massacre or a brutal war in raw numbers or overall destruction, but in little tragedies. Right? We get this shot of this girl getting blown away with the initial debris. The bully from an earlier scene gets crushed by a rock after he stumbles in fear. Later on, there's a woman presumably pulling her husband's leg who has been crushed by a rock as her child sits there helplessly. And another good example in episode 2 is this girl who gets cornered in an alley and picked up by her head by this Titan and eaten. It's not just about the numbers and the size of the event. It's about all of the small moments of human suffering that it causes, and Isayama takes time to show that to us. I think, of course, though, the one that sticks with all of us, the one that, of course, sticks with the narrative, really, is Carla's death. There are so many heartbreaking elements to this scene, right? It's the hopelessness of these kids trying to save their parent, Carla and the kids kind of having to reason with the situation and kind of make the cold, logical decision about how the most amount of people are going to survive this situation. The brief moment of hope when Hannes pulls up and we think, maybe he can take on this Titan and we'll all get away together. But then we see Titan Dinah really up close. And it's actually interesting. We don't see any Titan faces up to this point until Hannes looks at Titan Dinah. That's the first time that we get a full Titan face, and it's terrifying. That image has stuck with me ever since the first time I watched this episode. The whole body horror, uncanny valley stuff with how the Titans are constructed is so fresh at this point in time, and it makes them so terrifying and otherworldly. And so as Hannes runs, we understand where he's coming from, and it probably was the right choice to save Eren and Mikasa in this moment. He probably could not have killed it by himself. Eren crying out for his mom will always be heartbreaking, but I think the one that always really gets me is when Carla kind of has this realization that she's now alone, right? She quietly calls Mikasa and Eren to come back to her, to save her, to get her away from the Titan, but she knows she can't voice that out loud to them because they actually might come back for her and then they would be in danger. So she really wants this comfort at the end that she never receives. She wants somebody to be there for her, but she has to be there for her children, and it's just so sad, and her murder is just brutal and disgusting. Shiganshina is truly one of the most heart-wrenching tragedies I have ever encountered in fiction. It is an incredibly tough watch, even to this day. And the fallout isn't much better. The kids end up refugees, fleeing deeper into the walls to find a starving populace displaced from their homes. There simply isn't enough food, and there isn't enough land to cultivate enough food to support this population in such a small space now that Wall Maria is down. So soon 20% of the surviving population in the inner two walls are sent back out into Wall Maria. Over 250,000 people, almost all of whom are killed by the Titans in this mission. It seems like civilization in the walls has been totally doomed by this attack. Until, at the very end of episode 2, Eren joins the Scouts, and it feels like there's some hope. Like humanity is moving in something of a direction. It's been a while since I watched this show in its entirety. I've been rewatching bits and pieces to put this video together, so I'll miss out on some stuff, but we're going to move quickly through this part. But yeah, scout training is upbeat, and it really does feel like they're going to be able to fight back. There's real hope. It feels like humans have a fighting chance. And to that impulse, the Battle of Trost is a reality check. Humanity is still in a terrible situation. A lot of the characters we just met in training die brutal, slow deaths in front of their friends. But then Eren, transforming into a Titan for the first time, actually does become a real ray of hope for humanity moving forward. From here, the show then becomes a sequence of solving mystery after mystery and taking on increasingly stronger enemies. First, we fight Titans and try to figure out how Eren became one. Then we're taking on the warriors, starting with Annie and wondering about the origin of Titans and the mysterious homeland of our human foes. Then we're taking on just regular humans from within the walls, and we're finding out the dark secrets that uphold human society. Alongside our heroes, we fight against monstrous odds, digging our way out inch by inch, It's get a foot of ground and a mile is taken in return. We lose characters we love. We see their hearts broken, but ultimately, we see them break out of impossible odds time and time again, all in the name of fighting back against the Titans who slaughtered so many innocent people. By the time we finally made it back to Shiganshina, so much has changed. Our cast is so much stronger, but also so much smaller. We've experienced loss, betrayal, discovery, hope, and it's all going to culminate here as we've finally reached the basement, where the answers we've searched for this whole time are waiting for us. And it's so important that at this specific moment, we see the greatest symbol of the mission we've been on up to this point, Erwin's charge. A testament to the bond between the scouts and the righteousness of the mission to save humanity in the walls. For the audience and the characters, this is the greatest sacrifice we've had to endure up to this point. And it's just then filled with the most pride for the scouts, for Eren's mission to break free of the rule of Titans, for the memory of those we lost along the way, that we find out the real enemy we've been taking on this whole time is Marley. We now have a real, concrete enemy to fight against, one who's maybe even more evil than we thought at first. And with all that sacrifice and the grand mission we're on fresh in our minds, we head into Isayama's pop quiz. Eren's attack on Liberio is not just about getting after Reiner or killing Willie Tybur, getting the Warhammer, or killing all these military officers. He could have done a lot of that and just gotten out of there. He could have worked with his friends in Paradise to help launch some kind of secret sabotage and capture missions. Hell, if he had forgiven Reiner during his breakdown and taken him in, I'm pretty sure he could have turned Reiner against Marley. With Zeke's help, maybe they could have convinced the other warriors to help topple the Marleyan government. I mean, based on sentiments they express about Marley later on, it seems completely feasible and could potentially have saved a lot of Eldian lives. A lot of lives in general, but no. Eren pops up at an event he knows will be jammed with civilians, starts a battle in a populated city center, and he and Zeke's plan logistically forces a situation where Armin has to nuke the city's port, something that seems to kill a humongous amount of civilians. This not only makes sure peace is totally off the table, it gets Sasha killed, and it levels a district of the exact people Eren's supposedly protecting, Eldians, who have done absolutely nothing to deserve the suffering they've already experienced in this ghetto, but are now being slaughtered indiscriminately as collateral in Eren's war. We came to hate the Titans after Shiganshina because we saw the suffering they caused, the scale of the violence, the specific tragedies that composed that scale. We came to hate the warriors because their actions were reprehensible. How could you kill so many innocent people in such a horrible fashion? What kind of person could do that? But here we are, now standing on the side of the team who's killing indiscriminately and broadly. We watch a whole new set of little tragedies unfold. We watch a whole new city leveled in a conflict that most of the people never even knew they were a part of. We are right back in Shiganshina, but now those who were the victims are the perpetrators, and Isayama has, right under our noses, pulled off his twist. To me, this is like our midterm pop quiz whatever in the Attack on Titan course. This is the true inflection point in Eren's narrative. Now, originally when I wrote this video, I spent time going through each warrior and warrior candidate's unique circumstances. Basically, why they did what they did, and how our main cast came to terms with that in order to accept their help in fighting Eren. But I kind of want to narrow my focus onto Eren and the ending today, and I've already done a lot of not that, so I will only discuss one character here, but one which I think encapsulates Isayama's message on what it is we are supposed to do about handling the horrific fallout of war and genocide like we have experienced alongside our characters up to the beginning of the rumbling. Gabby is deeply indoctrinated into Marley's ideas about the wicked nature of the Paradisian people. She fights desperately so that she can be acknowledged as a good Eldian, so that Marley can finally see that not all Eldians are like the devils on Paradise. Gabby's susceptibility to Marley's propaganda about Eldian identity is something that helps to win her position as the lead warrior candidate. Her impressionability is the exact reason children are chosen as warriors. Kids are simply less likely to understand the injustices they have experienced at the hands of Marley. They are easier to feed specific narratives about the world around them when they have less context, and they are easier to control if their families are rewarded for their status as warriors. It's what pretty much gets them all in the door in the first place. Really, they want to protect their people, whether it's mom, their sort of father figure, a love, or their race. One way or another, they will fight to save those they care about. Of course, Gabby fell into the bad graces of the fandom after killing Sasha. Sasha is one of the most ubiquitously liked characters in the story. She is nothing but sweet and cool and funny throughout the entire narrative, and losing her at this point so close to the finish line after we've gone through everything to get off of the island and take down the Titans is just heartbreaking. And the way Gabby shows no remorse even after everybody on the blimp shows her mercy and just prisons her instead of killing her is, she's very unlikable at first. Once Gabby and Falco get back to prison on Paradise, they escape pretty quickly and take off into the woods, at which point they are taken in by Sasha's family, who have been raising many children displaced by the war. Yada, 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 skip a few very important steps. One day they go to a restaurant, and the girl Sasha saves early on in her backstory, Kaya, tells Gabby and Falco that a Marleyan captive works at this restaurant who may be able to help them escape back to their homeland. The problem is that this captive is Niccolo, and Niccolo fell in love with Sasha before the Liberio mission, and he's totally heartbroken at her loss. When Gabby reveals that she killed Sasha to him, he absolutely loses his mind, hitting Falco over the head with a wine bottle and taking Gabby upstairs to the Brouses to give Mr. Brouse the opportunity to avenge his daughter. Niccolo rages at Gabby for killing his one love, but she responds by raging back that his love killed people that she loved, and that as a Marleyan soldier, he shouldn't side with the island devils who just destroyed her home. And it's in this moment that Mr. Brouse takes the knife, but he doesn't kill Gabby. He instead says this: Sasha was a hunter. Even as a wee girl, she shot varmints in the forest for us to eat. That was just our way of living. But I knew there'd come a day when we'd have to give up that style of life. So I sent Sasha away from the forest. She went into the world, became a soldier, shot people far yonder, and got herself shot. In the end, though she left our forest, the world is a great big forest where everyone's fighting for their life. I reckon Sasha died because she wandered in the forest too long. We've got to keep the youngins out of the forest. Otherwise, ain't nothing gonna stop it from happening again. That's why it's up to us adults to shoulder the sins of the past. I think what Mr. Brouse is saying here is that placing the blame on one person or another for killing like this doesn't get anyone anywhere. Everyone on every side of this situation had their reasons for taking the lives they did. Revenge, or being accepted, or stopping the fighting, or whatever they thought they were doing in this moment. Either way, no matter what the excuse was, people got killed. Animals die in the forest. We don't get mad when the fox kills because it has to eat. He doesn't get mad that Gabby killed because she felt like she had to fight for those she loved. The only thing Mr. Brouse regrets is not protecting his child better. That all the children involved in this horrible war weren't protected from the fighting better. Unlike the Marleyan military, which chooses children for their warrior program specifically for their malleability and vulnerability, who burden these children with decisions and responsibilities which will fundamentally shape the world, who burden these children with traumas that will destroy them forever, Mr. Brouse believes it is the responsibility of adults to shoulder things like grief and resentment so that their conflicts will not carry over to the next generation, so that their children don't have to wander in a forest they created. If anything, all this feels like the culminating lesson of the course so far, right? The violence only stops when someone along the chain chooses forgiveness over revenge, no matter how hard that choice is. Mr. Brouse misses his daughter bad, but he knows that hurting another child is not the answer to losing his own. After this, Gabby fights alongside our heroes, and if you can't forgive her for killing Sasha, or at least set aside your feelings and understand where she was coming from after Mikasa, Armin, John, Connie, and Mr. Brouse himself have, Isayama is saying you should reconsider what this show has been trying to tell you. Everyone has their reasons for doing what they did, and it's not our job to reconcile those reasons. The main cast decides to just set their qualms aside, even if they'll never actually forgive each other fully, to secure a world where people can live peacefully. That is an incredibly difficult call to make, but the crew has enough emotional strength and acquired wisdom on the nature of violence that they refuse to fall back into a mentality where they fight for selfish interests, no matter how valid they are, instead of for the greater good of humanity on the principle of defending innocent lives. But there's one guy who can't seem to make that happen. As the rumbling begins, I think it's a good time to return to Isayama's quote. As for why I conceived such a story from the beginning, part of it was my desire to create a narrative with a major twist where the victim becomes the perpetrator. In seasons 1 through 3, we get conditioned to hate whoever put us in this situation. We see ourselves as fighting alongside the righteous war for humanity's freedom, and we never have to question if taking on the Titans is right. We never have to stop wanting answers to our questions. We never have to look at the violence as something that's our team's fault, as something avoidable. But then Liberio happens. I mean, I think I led the berry here, or whatever that phrase would be, inverted. But yeah, that is the twist moment in Isayama's planned narrative. When I said AOT was designed as a test of its readers, what I meant was that I think Isayama was trying to see if he could convince us to align ourselves with a violent ideology like that of the fascist Jaegerists. In the opening seasons, our conflict just feels so justified and epic and pure-hearted, and it really is. The iconography is on point, the hype moments are there, the charismatic leadership, the appeals to traditional ideas of especially masculine competency and self-worth wrapped in sort of revolutionary politics. Hell, even the intros are military propaganda songs. It's a perfect storm to get people on board with the mission. But when we get to Liberio, we are no longer the victims rightfully rebelling against an oppressor. In that moment, our side has become the perpetrators of violence on a mass scale against innocent people, the horrible action that supposedly drove our movement in the first place. At that point, Isayama is testing us to see if we are really just principled people against the killing of innocents, or if we could be convinced to commit horrible actions and excuse them away with whatever ideas we've conjured up about revenge or defending our people. From this point, Eren only gets worse. He betrays his friends, he betrays Zeke, he reveals that he was the one behind so much of the tragedy that brought us up to this point, and he turns on the whole world, not stopping until 80% of humanity, women, children, Marleyan, Eldian, kind, cruel, smart, friendly, wicked, or otherwise, are stomped beneath the feet of a million titans. This is the ultimate last stop for Eren defenders. So many wanted to stay with Eren even past Liberio, even up to the beginning of the rumbling. But I think Isayama does a really good job of showing what that costs. No matter the reasons we can make up for Eren, indiscriminate violence on this scale just simply cannot be excused. Eren has gone full circle, from the weak 12-year-old boy who watched his mother die brutally at the hands of a Titan, to the kid determined to save his people and free humanity, to the young man trampling out every life he can. This is the ultimate cost for excusing our violence. This is where the idea of a world filled with enemies, a chosen people who must rise up, an excuse to be violent to those who have done nothing wrong, this is where that gets us. And if you stayed with Eren until now, I think Isayama is saying you might really need to figure out your politics and worldview, or maybe you could have been convinced to, let's say, end up on the wrong side of history. From here, Isayama, of course, condemns Eren in the memory of his friends. To them, his death is, of course, sad. He's still a person that they loved, but his unwillingness to move on from conflict runs counter to our ultimate narrative goal. And for this, he is the only member of the cast who can't really be forgiven and brought back into the fold. They end up seeing Eren as the true enemy that existed among them all along. They return to Paradise and... Wait, you're telling me that's not what we land on? And I'm just now getting to the actual substance of the video? I've been writing this script for 1,000 years! Attack on Titan had long since ceased to be mine alone, and Eren became a character loved by many readers. In the end, without fully committing to portraying him as a detestable figure, I found myself depicting him with a certain closeness and sympathy. As a result, I feel there remains a sense of insincerity in the story's conclusion, at least in my own assessment. After the rumbling, the moments we get with Eren are very tender. Him and Armin's conversation will be a big part of our analysis here, how Eren is so quickly reduced to a dumb, groveling kid when he's forced to explain himself to his best friend who he's put through so much. Mikasa and Eren share their kiss and she cares for his body, and then of course there's the epilogue, where we see nothing has really changed. That the fascist Jaegerists have taken over Paradise, and that the wars they will bring about ultimately seem to end human society, at least on the island, at which point it appears this young boy is about to discover Titan powers and start this thing all over again. Safe to say, that ending satisfied absolutely 0% of the fan base. For many hardline Eren was right fans, cough cough, Nazis, this makes him look unnecessarily weak and drops away from the pro-fascist, pro-genocide narrative they were hoping for. By showing how misguided and pathetic he is at his core, Isayama reprimands these fans for their support of him, and the ultimate destruction in the epilogue reinforces the idea that Eren's plan would never have worked. We're just focusing on the anime ending here, by the way. However, for people on the anti-Eren side of things, this ending did not reject Eren harshly enough. They wanted the total condemnation of Eren's ideals and a death which did not respect or redeem him in any way. They would say Eren is genocidal and evil, and the story tries too hard to make excuses for that. And Isayama seems to kind of share this sentiment about his ending as well. Then, kind of a third camp, FD Signifier is one of my personal favorite sports YouTubers, and he has informed a lot of my politics. And generally, he falls into the last camp of wishing Eren was condemned a bit harder. Sorry, FD, I'm maybe going to flatten your ideas a bit. However, in his video about the ending a few years ago when it initially came out, he basically came to the same conclusion as Isayama has in the quote above, saying that halfway through writing the manga, Isayama had begun seeing himself so much in Eren Yeager that he couldn't commit to making him the evil villain he wanted to at the beginning. And so FD thinks that Isayama intentionally ruined the manga and made the ending bad to prevent people from siding with Eren, without also having to fully go against Eren himself. In FD's eyes, this ending gives AOT a low-key pro-fascist, pro-genocide read, though I believe he says that that was probably unintentional. So in general, Camp 3 is kind of just of the opinion that Isayama got too into his own work, / kind of forgot how to write at the end, and lost the proverbial plot. But whatever. There are lots of ways this ending has been read. Disappointing because it's not pro-fascist, disappointing because it doesn't commit to being anti-fascist, and a pathetic fumble at the finish line of a potentially great tale because the author couldn't separate himself from his beloved character. At the end of the day, the closeness and sympathy expressed for Eren at the end of the story is something that is, for many reasons, nearly ubiquitously hated in the fandom. It's the exam question that no one's read of AOT aligned with. It switched the subject, and it totally messed us all up. But why? The earliest piece of history we get in Attack on Titan is not of Ymir, but of hallucigenia. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this if you're in the fandom. Hallucigenia is a sea-dwelling worm species from around 500 million years ago. This is back in the Cambrian explosion, which is a period when life on Earth as we know it today really got started. This is like forever ago. It's 120 million years before our great to the 1000th power grandpa Tiktaalik got things cracking for life on land. It's like over 200 million years before the dinosaurs started popping up. It's a really long time ago. Hallucigenia is referred to as a lot of things. A god, a devil, and at some points, life itself. I can't remember if this is from a direct quote, but a lot of people in the fandom have taken to calling it the source of all living matter. So for this description, I'll switch between hallucigenia and the source. Hallucigenia makes its first appearance when it binds to Ymir's spine after she is nearly killed and awakens the power of the Titans. But its first chronological in-universe appearance actually occurs in Zeke and Armin's conversation about the meaning of life. Once Eren activated the rumbling and Zeke's euthanization plan failed, Zeke falls into a deep despair in the paths, and he talks to Armin about the meaninglessness of life. And he makes some seriously important points, some of which have actually become foundational to how I personally view the world today. To sum up, but also go kind of into a lot more detail on what Zeke said, this is all going to be from a totally non-religious perspective. So religious people, just stick with me. This is the atheist perspective on things. Life is just a product of chance. There was a clump of matter somewhere along the way that, through some random combination of chemicals and the elements that composed it, became life. It formed into the first single-celled creature, and then probably died. That must have happened a billion times all across Earth, maybe across the galaxy, until some combination of chemicals and compounds became a single-celled creature that had not only the components to be living, but also the desire to survive. See, if you made a mechanical animal, let's say a mechanical cow, and it could eat and it could grow new materials to make its body, and it could reproduce and it could do all the animal stuff, and you placed it in a field, do you know what it would do? Nothing. Just because something has the structural capacity to survive doesn't mean it will always perform those functions if it doesn't have something internal motivating it to do so. So the cosmos waited for a billion more attempts until a clump of matter became a cell, and that cell performed the functions necessary for it to survive as long as it possibly could manage. Eventually, a cell like this gained the ability to reproduce, and also the will to do so. That creature then gave birth to creatures after it, and they gave birth to creatures beyond that. Each iteration was born with unique strengths, maybe speed or size, the ability to eat its siblings, and from here they broke into entire new strains, the earliest species, each taking on new roles in the forming ecosystem. However, they all shared the same fundamental desires to survive and reproduce. Those desires, though, did not make these creatures morally superior to the billions who came before. This was just the biological machinery they had developed with no true involvement of their own consciousness. I mean, this is before consciousness. This is before true intelligence. They just happened along these adaptations. They had no idea what was going on. And the only reason we humans, their ancestors, are still alive today is because they randomly acquired this ability and desire to survive and reproduce. And there is no more meaning to our existence on this earth than that, again, from a scientific perspective. Survival is not a grand cause. It is simply true that if our single-celled ancestors did not desire to survive, they would not, and we would not exist. But since they did, here we are. If we lost our instinctual desire to perform survival functions and all humans died tomorrow, the universe would not cry for us. We would just melt away into the ground and become nutrients for the other creatures to live on. I know that sounds kind of depressing. It makes Zeke really sad, but I don't know. To me, it's weirdly comforting and I think totally okay. What this all means, though, is that humans carry an evolutionary desire that transcends any of our ideas about ethics, society, higher beings, or whatever else. That fundamental desire for survival, the impulse that is the only reason we exist. And that's what hallucigenia represents in this story. Ymir's desire for survival in this moment almost seems to call the being to her, and it latches onto her spine, which is probably the reason hallucigenia was picked, is because it looks like a spine, and it grants her the power of the founding titan. As we remember, King Fritz then takes Ymir in. He uses her to conquer the continent. He rapes and impregnates her, and he has her children devour her spine after she sacrifices her life for him, passing on her power to her offspring. Ymir is a lot like the early organism passing on its will to survive. She's just passing on the ability to become titans. Using this metaphor, the 9 titans are each like a unique adaptation. They are the speciation that occurred to fill all of the niches in the human world. One evolved for speed, another for size, one for armor, one for weaponry, and so on. All the ancestors of the original organism Ymir are linked in the paths, which I believe is the unique power of this strange deity-like strain of hallucigenia. How I imagine this organism works is that it passes its genetic information or psychic powers through the bloodline, and the psychic link space that it creates between these people's consciousnesses is what we see in the paths. Every Eldian has a bit of hallucigenia in them, and thus can access a bit of its hive mind. It grants the powers of the Titans as a way of defending itself, turning its hosts into powerful giants, unkillable by their competition, other regular humans. Why? All to fill its ancestral desire to reproduce and survive. The source, hallucigenia, isn't evil, and it's not really a god per se, even if it is magic. It's just an organism like any other. I think Isayama chose hallucigenia specifically because 1, the spine thing, it looks like spines, and 2, it lived so early in the developmental stages of life on Earth that it's easy to make this connection to the primal drive for survival and evolution. In this way, the hallucigenia ends up turning the Eldian people into one superorganism trying to survive in the natural landscape of our human world. The forest, if you will, indulge that callback. This kind of shows, for example, how a lot of white nationalists and Nazis view white ethnic groups as special peoples linked together and in a constant struggle with the rest of the world to survive and be the group of people, the collective being that survives and reproduces. In this way, we can understand the rumbling as the ultimate function of this being, totally eradicating all natural competition of the Eldian people. Our main cast coming to forgive each other runs counter to this, showing that this is not a necessary process if people are willing to work for the collective good instead of accepting a tribal mentality and fighting for survival in a human society where survival for all could kind of realistically be guaranteed. The bottom line is, we are not out in nature. Human society was built to separate us from the process of base animalistic survival, It's supposed to be the thing that stands between us and animals. There's ways around the rumbling, and the outcome we see in the epilogue is that Eldians are probably nearly extinct as a species within the next century. Realistically, I think Eren does have some concept of all of this. So why does Eren, specifically Eren in the long line of Eldians and Titans, actually pull the trigger on this? Why is he the one to bring about the rumbling? The ending was really confusing with Ymir, because, why did she serve the royal bloodline for 2,000 years after the way they treated her, and why didn't she fight back against them, and why was Mikasa the one who freed her? That was all stuff that I didn't get on my first watch through. And so we'll have to go back through Ymir's tale a little bit closer to understand where we ultimately end up with Eren. When Ymir's story is introduced, it's Historia asking her older half-sister, the founding titan that Grisha took the founding titan from, what it means to be ladylike. So Ymir is introduced through the idea of a traditional mythos of girlhood. We see that after everything that Ymir has been through, after how terribly she was treated by Fritz, after how she was going to be killed, when she gains her powers, she just kind of returns to continue being a slave to Fritz out of a obedience to authority, which maybe comes from her early socialization that led her to believe that her purpose in life was servitude to a power that is above her. Ultimately, she envisions herself as a human being, as a slave to someone. And that's because this was, and arguably still is, how traditionalist mentalities see women. In her life back in the Dark Ages, she was never going to be a free person of her own. She was always going to be paired with a man. And this is the man she has. So Ymir works for King Fritz all those years, and she is rewarded with nothing but abuse, no acknowledgement of her sacrifice. And then she literally, physically sacrifices herself to save him. In the past, for 2,000 years, she builds titans, functionally continuing the expansion of the Eldian Empire even after death. We know that this is exactly what King Fritz wanted. He says that his dream in building his empire is that as long as his ancestors passed down the powers of the titans, they would continue to build the Eldian Empire, which he sees as ultimately a part of him. In this way, he goes into death imagining himself as eternally powerful over the world, even long after he's gone. And so, in this way, Ymir is doing the work of both the hallucigenia in the survive and reproduce sense on a literal level, and then the work of King Fritz on the race-wise protect our people and dominate others level by continuing to build these titans and serve the royal family. Her motivation for this is revealed simply to be that she loved Fritz. For whatever reason, one can never really know, despite how he treated her and how evil he was, she was madly in love with the man. She would do anything to earn his affection, even 2 millennia of building his empire for him. However, when Eren comes to her in the paths, he doesn't see her as a servant or as some mystical being, but as a young girl who should have been treated better. And now, she finally has the chance to take her revenge and rebuild the world the way she wants. But that's not what she wants. That's not what she ever wanted. She doesn't want revenge. She doesn't want a world in her image. She wants love and acknowledgement. Eren is just another King Fritz. So in this moment, Eren doesn't release Ymir from her curse so much as he releases hallucigenia from Ymir, which literally binds his body back together and grants him the powers of the founder. I think in this moment, hallucigenia may have actually clinged on to Eren's fear and desperate fighting for Eldian survival, instead of the version of events where Eren frees Ymir from the royal curse himself. To me, this is proven later on, and that the only thing which actually lifts Ymir's curse to remain at the coordinate and build titans for Fritz's empire, and that finally lets her rest in peace, is Mikasa killing Eren. Mikasa loves Eren more than the whole world, just like Ymir loved Fritz, but Mikasa isn't willing to let that blind her to Eren's evil. She will not follow him to whatever end. She has her own things that she wants. Ultimately, Mikasa values saving the remaining 20% of humanity over saving her love, setting aside her feelings and instincts to do the right thing not for herself personally, but for humanity overall. In this moment, Ymir feels liberated from Fritz, as she just watched her ancestral daughter liberate herself from the evil man she was bound to by love. Mikasa has, in a way, literally rewritten Ymir's story. But again, Isayama doesn't just stop at Eren is evil. Eren has his reasons too. At first, in Eren and Armin's conversations in the paths, Eren is kind of trying to claim that he's done the rumbling for his friends so that he can send the Titans across the seas and wipe out all the potential threats so that his friends can live out their lives peacefully, and then they'll kill him and they'll be the heroes of humanity, and there will still be enough humans outside the walls to rebuild one day. And then Armin kind of calls BS on that because it doesn't really line up with his actions. And so a bit later on in the conversation, then Eren claims it's just fate, that his memories are so mixed up with the memories and experiences of the other Attack Titans that he doesn't even know what's real, and now that he can see the future and the past at the same time, it's almost like the decision was out of his hands. But then after the conversation about Mikasa potentially moving on to another man and forgetting about Eren, Eren shows his real colors. He totally breaks down like a whiny baby, and he admits he's still just a dumb kid. To go back to the beginning of our story here, Eren always wanted to be a scout. There was some kind of impact on him early in his life, the trauma of living inside of these walls, knowing that one day the Titans might knock it down and come in. He didn't want to sit and wait to one day be killed, even if that meant choosing war in a time where he probably could have lived his life in peace. Beyond this, he has this vision of a free world without the kind of oppression he's experiencing in the walls. Him and Armin share this dream of what the nature outside could look like and all the beauty they could encounter in a world without Titans boxing them in. In fact, I think this freedom scene on top of the founding Titan really shows him totally disconnected from the horrors he's causing below, because really he always wanted an empty world to explore. Eren would never be okay with just starting the rumbling, threatening the rest of the world, and protecting Paradise, because that would just be putting up another wall around himself. It would be having another monster waiting just outside of the defenses, constantly threatening an attack, making it so that Eren could not partake in the world in the ways he always dreamed he could. Eren doesn't just want an empty world because he hated humanity. He dreamt of an empty world because he thought about the freedom and the possibilities and the beauty that could occur in a world where he had nothing to hide from, where he had nothing to fear. But that's not what he finds when they finally escape the walls. That's the essential thing that's really driven Eren all this time. It wasn't the injustice of Shiganshina or the desire to protect innocent people or wanting to help his friends. Eren has a deep psychological drive toward freedom, and he let it control him. Eren got his hands on way too much power and was, self-admittedly, just too caught up in his own visions of what he wanted to actually figure out what the right thing to do with it was. He is just a limited human being, and he came into the kind of power that no single human being ever should have. His instincts drove his actions, and he couldn't really control himself. That's not an excuse for Eren. He could have chosen to change all this if he really, really wanted to. The time thing is not a way out for him. He did choose the rumbling, even when he knew the outcome, because deep down, it's what he wanted to do. And that is the reason why Eren is a villain in this story. It's not because he's some abstract monster who always loved violence. It's not because he's a totally inhuman sociopath who can't conceive the suffering of others. It's that he was willing to pay in innocent lives to actualize his selfish, personal desires. The misdirected primal drive to fight for survival, the quest for freedom from an outside force's control, or a terrible love that you cannot break no matter how bad it is for you. All of these are real and deep psychological issues that drive our characters into their actions that they are honestly mostly unaware of. They come up with reasons to justify these things, but at the end of the day, they are driven by some forces that are fundamental to our humanity. They're hard to identify precisely, but it's the members of our cast who are able to squash or set aside these primal emotional desires and who can really look at situations logically, empathetically, with the best hopes for all humanity in mind, who end up being our true heroes. And now look, this all isn't to say that I don't get why people don't like that that's where we land with Attack on Titan, right? It feels like at the end we kind of do go soft on Eren in a story that, I mean, it is now a confirmed fact. It was fundamentally constructed to condemn Eren's actions. But at the end of the day, we've spent time trying to understand the warriors and the warrior candidates and everybody involved in this situation. So why would that stop at Eren? Even if he's the worst person in the history of the world, is it not worthwhile to try and understand why he did what he did? Ultimately, it's not about condemning Eren at the end of Attack on Titan, because it's about understanding where people like Eren are coming from. Hello, editing Sean here, just rehashing a bit of a point, because I think I covered this, but I want to really make sure that I land the plane on this idea before we get out of here, because I think I covered the natural history stuff and the individual character motives pretty well, but I want to make sure that I say that Eren doesn't deserve sympathy just because. The only reason we have to look at him empathetically is to understand who he is as a human being, so that we can try and prevent people from ending up like him ever again in the future. We don't empathize with Eren at the end of the story because, everybody deserves to be totally forgiven for all the wrong they do, or an evil person like Eren should get off free for doing the awful thing that he did. That's not what Isayama, I think, is trying to say. I think what he's going for is that we need to understand why people do these things to make sure we can eliminate the elements of our society that create monsters like this or allow monsters like this to get power. One thing that I think it's important to remember is that Hitler is not a monster. He's a monster in the sense of the phrase that we use that as he's a terrible person. He's the worst human being maybe ever, but he's not a literal monster. Hitler is closer to you and I than any other organism on this planet in the sense that we're all human. Like, you're more likely to become Hitler than to become a horse, if you know what I mean. It's really important then that we understand what makes a Hitler, what makes an Eren, so that we can set up a world where we don't let people like this gain power. That's why the whole twist is about teaching us to not end up on the side of the Jaegerists, who are kind of our ideological stand-in for the Nazis. It's that we never get roped into the horrible things that a person like this does if we support them and give them ultimate power in our world. And that's what the whole piece about principle is here. I don't think I ever really defined what I meant by principle, but to me, principles are the essential virtues that we cannot concede, because we know violating these things would be deeply wrong under any and all circumstances. So here we're talking about the fact that killing innocent people is bad. That is the principle that we cannot concede. And it is on that principle that Hanji, Mikasa, Armin, and the others decide to go to stop Eren, even though it would benefit them and their people, and it would guarantee peace on the island for forever if they went and genocided the whole rest of the world. But like Hanji says, genocide is wrong. Killing innocent people is never good, no matter who it protects or what benefit it gives you. And if you can accept the killing of innocent people under some certain circumstance, then you could be a Jaegerist, you could be a Nazi. If you cannot accept it under any circumstance, then you can guarantee that you won't be on the side of an Eren, on the side of a Hitler in a rumbling type situation. So yes, forgiveness is an important part of Attack on Titan's story. The warriors and Armin and all that, but those who are forgiven for their past crimes are forgiven because they're not perpetuating them into the future. Eren is our unforgivable character, our character who is not innocent and must be killed because he refuses to stop the killing. At the same time, he is something that we do have to try to understand to defend innocent lives in the future, even if that requires empathizing with someone committing a genocide. If the ultimate goal is peace, and examining the mindset of a guy like Eren serves that purpose, it's got to get done. That's what I think Isayama was going for with this ending, albeit very incompletely and probably not super well. But we'll talk about that in the next segment. Let me finish up here. Ultimately, it's not about condemning Eren at the end of Attack on Titan, because it's about understanding where people like Eren are coming from. I don't know if I totally agree with Isayama's takeaway about what that is, but I think his idea about the way that these kind of primal, deep ingrained psychological desires can express themselves in strange ways in modern society is so interesting. I mean, think about this in the context of modern war, just to get slightly less abstract. The instincts for fear and violence that we have to, like, I don't know, say get out of a situation where a saber-toothed cat is going to kill us are now applied to things like flying bomber missions, where once maybe we would have acted out violently in a misplaced way and attacked another animal in our environment or another member of our family unit. The weapons of mass destruction and war that we have invented with our unique intelligence in the natural world turn that simple, sudden, violent survival impulse that does exist within all of us into something which can kill hundreds of thousands, millions of people in an instant. War, in groups and out groups, good guys and bad guys, all feel so natural because it's a part of the survival dynamic. When we come across that saber-toothed cat in the forest, it's us or them. But human society doesn't have to be like that. We have all of the tools to make it so that we can handle these conflicts peacefully, and we can make sure that everybody has what they need to be able to survive. Again, not to keep rehashing the point, but getting out of a survival state is the whole point of humans organizing into societies in the first place. But we have these competing deep psychological investments: fear tied to survival instinct, personal connections and relationships, desires born out of the fundamental circumstances of our lives. Every single human on planet Earth is driven by something deeply wired in and deeply unique. But our pursuit of these things can cause conflict. Conflict that causes pain and death that cause revenge. But it's only when we're willing to set aside our deep desires, no matter how important to us or how valid they might be, for the greater good of the human cause, that we can create a truly peaceful world. All right, look at that. We got to the end here. Welcome to Chill Time if you've never been here before. This is the part of the video where I kind of stop editing. I'm going to be starting a Pokemon Heart Gold Nuzlocke in the background of this one, so you should see that playing right now. I probably put in the title or thumbnail that Attack on Titan is poorly written, or it's a writing mess or something, which I do kind of think is true. Of course, my opinions of Attack on Titan are incredibly high. That was mostly clickbait, but I will be talking about that in just a few minutes because there is one thing that I want to cover first. Okay, so I had a different version of this recorded originally, but I'm coming back right at the end of making this video because it's been so long since this initially happened and there's been developments and stuff, and I went maybe into too much depth on it without knowing enough. So we're just going to very quickly talk about this situation, but I wanted to bring up the recent riots in Northern Ireland. If you don't know, this whole thing happens. Allegedly, this Sudanese immigrant attacks this guy, broad daylight, middle of the street, all on video. The dude's probably going to go to jail for like forever, but you got to say allegedly because lawsuits and whatever. The Sudanese immigrant almost beheads this dude, Stephen Ogilvy, cuts his eye out. Super brutal attack. It's really terrible, terrible thing that happened. In the aftermath of that, though, a bunch of Northern Irish people started going out into immigrant neighborhoods and just kind of indiscriminately attacking immigrant houses and businesses and taking down infrastructure in these kinds of neighborhoods. And it was all kind of on the basis that these immigrants are coming over to Northern Ireland. They're sapping all the social resources. They're doing all this crime. And, they need to fight them out to preserve the white Northern Irish identity. And this is something that we see all across Europe and America right now. It's dominant cultural groups of white people thinking of themselves as like a chosen people under attack when that's not the reality, right? A quote from what I said earlier: groups of people think of themselves as special peoples linked together and in a constant struggle with the rest of the world to survive and be the group of people, the collective being that survives and reproduces. So this is back to the hallucigenia stuff, right? How hallucigenia links all the Eldians and kind of makes them all into like its vessel for it surviving in the world. This metaphor is already so complicated. I'm adding a layer of dumb complexity on top of it for no reason. The overall point I think we all get is that these people are thinking of themselves as a group that needs to be preserved. And if their group doesn't win, they'll be killed off by the other groups in the rest of the world, right? The classic Jaeger is saying, if we win, we live. If we die, we lose. And it's kind of that mentality, the whole zero-sum game look at how ethnic groups survive in our modern world. But I really wanted to mention it because I think it really follows with the kind of Jaegerist mentality where, right, the initial issue in Attack on Titan is the attack on Shiganshina, and then it ends up flipping when we go and do Liberio and the Rumbling, and we see that the initial issue was never the violence in the first place, but it was actually this kind of, survival group of people, survival-based stuff with hallucigenia, and then Aaron's desire for freedom is really what drives us to this point. And I think this is a similar situation because the way that the Northern Irish people responded to this, it's like the initial issue was supposed to be the violent attack, which was really, really terrible. But then when you see that there have been other brutal murders in Northern Ireland over the last year, which have not been responded to in a similar way because the participants weren't immigrants, even though they were, maybe less brutal and less public, but still really horrible attacks that happened, the response is very different. And then when you see that the response is to go destroy infrastructure and attack people's houses and stuff who are not directly related to the situation in any way, who are innocent, they haven't done any crimes, innocent families just trying to make a living, you can see that the initial issue that really is being pushed isn't that there is violence happening and we're principled against violence and we want to stop the violence. The issue is that these people are in Northern Ireland and we want them out, and we're going to use this attack as an excuse to go out and do our own violence against these people. So if I didn't explain it well enough earlier, that's kind of what I mean by the being principled against violence, right? If the issue was violence in the Stephen Ogilvy case, we would send this guy to jail. We would come out in support of Stephen Ogilvy's family, but we wouldn't go and continue attacking random innocent people, because the whole point was that a guy got nearly murdered when he didn't deserve to for no reason. But of course, that's not the point. That's kind of the idea that's really come out of the American propaganda machine, but has super gotten into Europe, that, immigrants are taxing our welfare system, when in reality, we can see that our welfare system is being taken away by the richest people in our societies. I mean, I don't know that much about Northern Irish politics, but I can say definitely for the US over here, we just saw what Elon Musk did with Doge. If you think the immigrants are taking your welfare, he was doing it right in front of your face. And then I know for a fact that immigrants in the US commit less crime on average than their citizen counterparts. So that whole narrative about immigrants doing crime, total BS. So yeah, this all kind of ends up just being an excuse to take out this kind of primal survivalist mentality projected onto the world and go do acts of violence. And that's not even mentioning the fact that this is a Sudanese immigrant, Sudan, a colonial holding of England. So the fact that we're talking about, Sudanese immigrants and villainizing them for coming to the UK in the first place is crazy, when the initial conflict that's causing these people to be refugees and leave Sudan started from a colonial conflict that, the English kind of set up. So a lot of layers there. I hope I kept that relatively short enough and got the general idea across. I know I've just been kind of repeating myself a ton in the last section of this video, but whatever. I shortened this up. The initial segment was longer. Okay, into the real chill time now. All right, done with that. No more serious stuff today. Just whoosh, sweat off our backs. But yeah, now we're going to talk about why I said AOT is a thematic mess. And really the big reason is that it's trying to pull this grand twist on us, right? We established the victim to perpetrator thing earlier. We're supposed to be on Aaron's side. Then Aaron's going to become principally a bad guy. And we're going to have to realize at some point that we're on the wrong side of things, hop off the train, and start working against Aaron if we want to see ourselves as on the, morally right side of this story. But the problem is that it never seals the deal on that twist in a super effective way, in my opinion, because Aaron's conclusion retwists that twist before it's fully set in for a lot of people. What do I mean by that? Right? We get all the establishing details. We have Liberio where, things start turning around. We get up to the rumbling, and that is clearly the moment when we're supposed to be done with Aaron. 80% of humanity is just a ridiculous amount of people to kill. There is no moral justification for killing 80% of humanity. The amount of innocent people that is, I mean, that's 79% innocent people and 1% people who maybe actually could have needed to die. That is so obviously evil that it still should stand alone as a clear, we weren't supposed to be on Aaron's side in this situation. However, that is already a big swing for us to have emotionally. To go from being so involved with this character for so long and caring about him and his motivations and understanding where he's coming from and really getting connected into the scout movement and all this, to get us to that point where we're able to fully reject that and see Aaron as deeply flawed and forgive Reiner and Gabby and all this big emotional work that happens at the end that I talked about, that is already a lot. But to have to do that and then also not forgive Aaron, but come to an understanding with Aaron, that is a lot to ask. At the ending with Aaron, it's like we are finally supposed to be going from seeing you as our good guy to our evil guy, but then in your last moments, you totally become the person that we always knew you as up to this point again, who felt like that guy was totally left behind. We see like the humanness, the flaws, the regular guy of it all. And it feels like it's trying to maybe send a different message than this is the evil dude who we were supposed to be flipped against. I think when you do go back to it with a analytical comb and pick through all the information, it is pretty clear what Isayama is trying to do, right? We have forgiven so many people, or at least understood so many people up to this point. Why would Aaron not get that same treatment? Obviously we need to kill him to stop the rumbling, but is understanding him as a human being important to preventing somebody like this from existing again in the future? That all makes sense. But all I'm saying is that when you have done this big emotional 180 and it's so hard to steer the audience over in that direction, away from the initial support of Aaron in the movement, which is so deeply ingrained, it's almost like Isayama did too good of a job getting us on that side of things, that when the twist happens, he has to do so much work to get us back. And then when he wants this little kind of sneaky retwist at the end where we can't fully write Aaron off, it just totally makes the whole momentum of the thing crumble. And the ending just ends up feeling so confusing. Like on a first watch through, it's just like brutal trying to pick through what Isayama wants you to think about this. Again, I think on paper it's structured well enough. Isayama's a genius. This is amazing. And the commentary, obviously, I just went through, I think is incredibly important on human nature and stuff, but it just feels really stuffed in at the end in a way that is not very helpful. I think this problem could have been fixed by like low key doubling the length of the material of season 4 and fitting a bunch of other stuff in there. I think having an earlier turn on Aaron where it's very clear we are not supposed to be on his side anymore, and then we're still building to the rumbling, would make it so that we have like 8 episode buffer where now we're working against Aaron, and we get that kind of emotional distance from him over a period of time where maybe one, he's on screen less, so we're not constantly in contact with what he's thinking and what he's doing, and he's kind of this vague threat in the background. Because I do think the episodes in between the actual movie and when the rumbling starts do kind of have this effect where Aaron becomes an outside threat as opposed to a person that we're deeply connected with. Extending that time period would let us kind of complete that 180 turn on who he is, and then establishing again the principle that we're trying to defend, which is that the thing that was bad that happened in Shiganshina was the killing of innocent people. The thing that's bad that's about to happen in the rumbling is the killing of innocent people, and that's why we should stand against both of those events. Establishing that in that middle point while Aaron is distant from us would let us finish making that twist, that full turn back. And then once we fight him, we kill him, we've had this distance from him. Then when we get close again, I think having a moment where we actually get to understand Aaron on a deeper level would work totally fine. But I just think that the time was way too compressed on that. And there was so many other ideas being explored, like the conversation with Armin and Zeke. It felt like Isayama needed to find a reason to defend why it was important to protect innocent people. And that's why he had this weird aside about the meaning of life and stuff. I understand that impulse because Isayama is trying to build like a full philosophical argument that is self-contained within this show. So I see why he felt the need to establish that. Should have happened earlier in the story, probably. Should have happened way earlier in the story, because it's just there's a couple departures like that from this main narrative that take up a lot of time in the middle, get us off of thinking about Aaron a little bit, and it's just like, I don't know, that needed more time and it needed more focus on making the twist happen. And then you can kind of sprinkle in the retwist at the end and get a little bit closer to Aaron. Overall, about the deep motives thing, one thing I do want to say is that it's really important to remember that me as an analyst of this anime slash manga, the anime slash manga itself, and Hajime Isayama are 3 different things with 3 different opinions, right? Isayama came into writing the story with his beliefs about the world, and he tried to write them into the story as best he could. The story then went out into the world existing as what he had made, and even though he had intended it to be something, the way that people receive it and the actual material that he came up with are different than his intentions. And so the work ends up taking on an opinion of its own. So there's Isayama's opinion, and then the work's opinion, which is, again, really influenced by Isayama, is fundamentally defined by his actions, but can be a little bit different than what he wanted. And then there's me, the analyst, where I bring my own opinions and biases to the piece. I analyze it in a certain way and then reflect that back to you guys. So what I'm guessing at is both Isayama's opinions and the opinions of the piece, while trying to set my own opinions aside, kind of, but sometimes not really trying to set my own opinions aside. Obviously, this is one where I threw in my 2 cents quite a bit. And so, yeah, my analysis of this work, honestly, in some ways, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, I don't really know that this is what Isayama intended with the hallucigenia stuff. I think it makes sense. I think all the details line up for it. But based off of his interview and the stuff that we've heard about him talking about this since, it doesn't even seem like this was really like a main plot thing that he was focused on. And I'm really into natural history, and maybe that's just the reason I read it the way I did. I fuck with dinosaurs, and so I read dinosaur stuff into this story when maybe I wasn't supposed to. So Isayama, the work, and my opinions are different. In the main analysis section of this, I am trying to provide you with what I think the work's opinion on the world is. That's, again, I don't want to say it too much, but it's different than Isayama, different than me. This chill time stuff, like that stuff about Belfast, that was my opinion on the world. And I used Attack on Titan as a reference point, but those two things are separate. So just know that sometimes when I say stuff in these, I'm trying to represent ideas that aren't mine. That's all I was trying to get at. I'm going to have to cut out a lot of that speech. So if it's kind of clippy, whatever, but I repeated myself like 100 times. Sorry. But yeah, I totally lost my original point with why I was bringing that up. Oh yeah, deep desires. Right. So I think Isayama's take on like the way that Ymir's love influenced her and Eren's desire for freedom and the survival stuff, I think that it does make a really like true point about the world. He does this with Kenny's drunk thesis as well. You know, Levi's an Ackerman too, so he experiences this kind of thing. This is like a theme that crops up in Attack on Titan. One of my critiques is that I don't think that it is a main theme. It's just kind of a side idea that it feels like he's playing with at the beginning of the story. And then he has to explain away Eren a little bit when he, you know, again, that like closeness and sympathy problem. And so he writes it back into Eren's character in maybe a bigger way than he initially intended. I don't necessarily know that that's the most effective way for evaluating the reason why things like this happen in the world. I kind of mentioned it in the Belfast part, but I don't know that when genocide happens, it's an expression of somebody's individual motive or deep desire. Like, I don't know that the Holocaust happens because Hitler had some psychological issue and just like that kind of made him stumble into a situation where he had all this power and directed it on that, right? I think that comes from like the history of anti-Semitism goes thousands of years back, way before Hitler. That is something that's been used as a scapegoat. I mean, Jews have been used as a scapegoat and as political devices in European history as long as European history has been European history. And I think it is more effective to analyze conflicts like this through the lens of who gains and who loses. Now, this is like the leftist in me coming out here a bit, but I think when we're evaluating war, it's not so important that we understand how the individual citizen, let me take that back. It is really important to understand how the individual citizen is motivated into war, but understanding the nature of war itself, I think to me is more about understanding the nature of why people choose war, aka analyzing what certain wars are doing for certain members of our society. Like I mentioned with the like neo-colonial US in the Middle East for oil purposes wars, like all that stuff. There are people gaining from those wars. It is the arms dealers, it is the oil barons, it is the US government officials who are associated with them and who take campaign funds from them. There are people who, when they send our boys over there and they blow up innocent people, they get stuff out of that. And that to me is the most important analysis of a war, as opposed to how those good old American boys are convinced to go over there and do those actions. That is important, but to me, the A1 priority is always the systemic analysis. Who is driving this and what are they getting from it? And that's not something that Attack on Titan really delves into too much. But, you know, if I was to write Attack on Titan, which I obviously never could, but that would be something that I would focus on a bit more. A difference between Jujutsu Kaisen, which I talk about for the most part on this channel, and AOT is Jujutsu Kaisen is very much leftist anime, and it's about analyzing systems in that kind of way. Who's gaining from what? Who's in power? Why are they in power? Attack on Titan doesn't concern itself as much with that. It concerns itself with the experience of the foot soldier, the experience of the oppressed individually. So a different thing there, but pretty interesting. And that's where the whole deep drives kind of mentality comes from. Again, wouldn't have been my way of analyzing this issue, but is very interesting. And to the point that I kind of mentioned with bringing up all the people earlier, right? It's something that it's clear that like the Ackermans inherited Ymir's drive to protect people, that express some similarity to Fritz, I think. And, you know, I think that that was planned for the ending and Mikasa's involvement and all that. As for the rest of a lot of the evidence for this, which would be like talking about the warriors and the warrior candidates and why they end up doing what they do, or maybe like how Jean thinks about things or Erwin's childhood, all of that I think could be a part of this deep desires, like psychological fundamental drives conversation. But to me, most of that kind of fall more into the realm of regular character stuff as opposed to DNA coded parts of our brain that we just like can't even engage with on an intellectual level that are like kind of pushing us into certain situations. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but it just feels like it's something that exists in the story but was never meant to be the main focal point. And then Isayama kind of shoved that all into the end and made it the whole thing at the last moment. So that's why I would say it's a thematic mess. It's because of the retwisting of the twist and because of the fact that this idea existed in the story but was overrepresented in the ending in a way that I think threw people off a lot. Okay, two last things I want to talk about. First off, I'm going to throw some links in the description here about some of my favorite paleo human history videos because I think that they're so interesting to Ymir's story. I just want to yap about that for a second. So yeah, I love Ymir's backstory because of the way that it represents ancient human history in like this very, let me say it for the millionth time this video, survive and reproduce kind of way. I mean, even to this day, the way that power changes hands in human society and about what and to who, it is so like animalistic in a way that's really kind of freaky, right? Like when we're talking about countries capturing land, it's about controlling resources that allow us to get our survival needs, right? When we need natural resources for building, that's shelter. When we need land, it's to make food. And I think a lot of the earliest wars that we have on record in human history are like really about this. Can we fight off this neighboring tribe because we're worried they're going to attack us and we feel like we have to protect ourselves? Can we take over their land and enslave their people so we have a bigger workforce that can help us produce enough food for next winter so that we can survive? Can we, like Ymir's case, kind of what happened? Can we, take their women so that we have a bigger reproductive pool? Understanding that as expressions of territorial desires, as the need to control certain social resources so that your position in a group can't be threatened. I think you see that like a lot of, to go to Isayama's point about the deep desire stuff, maybe he's convincing me here. But a lot of the reasons why people get super rich and countries go to war and all this is fundamentally based on the instincts that we developed for being able to survive in a forest somewhere in Africa. And I think that that's really both terrifying and incredibly, incredibly interesting. Again, check out the videos that I have linked down below. I think it's impossible to really understand, in my opinion, the human condition and the ways politics work today without understanding our ancient ancestors, our ties into evolution and natural history, because it really shows like when they go to Ymir's village and they burn it down and they take slaves as laborers, and when Fritz impregnates this little girl to control her powers and stuff, that is like truly like base animal survival function, and it's scary and interesting. But the other piece about Ymir's backstory that I wanted to mention is also that to me, it kind of feels like a rewriting of the history of the Roman Empire. When we see Marley early on, right, they're in this formation with the big, let me at least just pull up. Yeah, with the big kind of like with the big semi-rounded shields and big plated armor, spears. Let's not use an AI image. That's gross. But yeah, like we know what we're referring to here. This shield and spear combo. Yeah, it feels like they kind of borrow some of the aesthetics of that. And then notably, when we see Fritz takes over Marley with Ymir's power, the things that he does are like build roads, build aqueducts, build monuments with these big pillars on the front made out of giant stone bricks. Like, it's so referential to, I mean, I guess early European aesthetics in general, right? You could, with that temple and that armor, especially like Fritz's armor that he puts on where you can see like the titties and the abs outline on him, that could definitely be Greek. But to me, I think the roads and the aqueducts make it obvious that this is Rome. Like that's what Rome is known for, is the roads and the aqueducts and this kind of style of armor. And the Romans' earliest conflicts were with other people in Italy who were similar tribes from different areas that they duked it out with and to initially conquer Italy. And I think there's a chance that the Eldians represent this. I think there's also a chance that maybe this is a little bit earlier down the line and Rome has already conquered all of Italy and they're pushing into Germany, and the Eldians are a Germanic people who just kind of happen to get their hands on this power. They could even be the Visigoths, and the Visigoths are the ones who ultimately sack Rome at the very end there. I would say that doesn't necessarily line up timeline-wise, because then all of the aqueducts and roads and temple stuff has already happened in the past. But, it's a similar ethnic group. Maybe a Balkan people, maybe a German people, maybe this is really on in the Empire and it's another Italian clan. But I think based off of the way that they dress and their style of armor, I think is very referential to like Viking stuff. So maybe they're Danes, maybe they're Frisians is a group of people who maybe would have been popping around this. I think Frisians maybe are a little bit later on, but that's Googleable. Whoa, the Frisians are an ethnic group indigenous to northwestern Europe and the coastal regions of the northern Netherlands, northwestern Germany, southwestern Denmark, area known as Frisia, and are concentrated the Dutch province of Friesland in Germany, East Frisia, North Frisia, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, the origin of the name Frisians, which is derived from Frisi or Frisones, names used by the Romans to describe a Germanic tribe that inhabited the same region but disappeared during the early 5th century before the appearance of the Frisians. So maybe not the Frisians literally, but the Frisians' ancestors. Ooh, that's cool. That's Fritz and Fries, that pretty closely connected. That would be cool if that's what that was. That's where it came from. Let's read into these people a little bit more. This is fun. We're doing this live. Ancient tribe neighbors to the Roman Empire in the low-lying coastal region between the Rhine and Ems rivers. That kind of fits the rolling hills and stuff that we see around Ymir's village. Early Saxons. Okay, I was gonna bring up Saxons as another group of potential people, but I guess that they would be the same thing at this time. This is interesting. During the 1st century of BC, Romans took control of the Rhine Delta, but Frisi to the north of the river managed to maintain some level of independence. There was a lot of interaction, however, as the Frisi and Chauci were enlisted in the Roman army, and Roman traders established themselves north of the lines. Their lands were forest covered with tall trees growing up to the edge of lakes. That sounds kind of like Paradis, honestly. They lived by agriculture and raising cattle. That kind of looks like what was going on in her village. Maybe, I don't know if I'm just taking every detail to be like it's evidence at this point. That's kind of what I'm doing. So yeah, seems like they came into some conflict with Rome. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily like the definitive battle relationship that Marley and Aldea had at this point in time, it seems, but I don't think that it's impossible that Isayama was writing with reference to some kind of Germanic people. The Frisi could certainly be what he was thinking of. So that's how you get the name Fritz. I think that would be cool, but yeah, I think that this is kind of Ymir's backstory is really a rewriting of the history of Rome. If one of these Germanic peoples had somehow gotten their hands on like a weapon of mass destruction. That's a whole other video, why the Titans are weapons of mass destruction and what that means symbolically for war in the world of Attack on Titan and in our world. I was kind of examining them as animals, but there's definitely a reading to examine them as nukes, a pretty literal one in Armin and Bertholdt's case. But yeah, to my point about how a regular guy gets their hand on way too much power, and that's how, somebody's survival instinct can turn into bombing a whole city that I made earlier. This is one of those examples of like at a certain point in history, the wrong person gets their hand on a weapon that is so beyond the rest of the world at this point in time that all of a sudden everything changes. So really, really, really interesting. I hope to expand on that at some point in the future. I kind of have a video loosely planned that I want to make at some point in the next year. I think I'm going to call it like the 2000 years between. And it's like from you and to you, 2000 years, whatever episodes, and talk about everything that happened in Ymir's life and basically the information that we know that happened in between, and kind of do some maybe historical fiction thinking about what was going on during that time and why things ended up the way they did. I think that would be a really fun video. So that's one that's on the table. Another one that's on the table is a video with AOT and JJK where I compare their writing styles and do like, I would clickbait it and be like, JJK is way better written than AOT, and people would get mad and click on it. It would be very fun. I don't know. Is the clickbait really annoying, or can you guys look past that? Like, am I being too YouTubery with some of these titles? But yeah, that one would be like a comparison of writers that are planners versus like kind of make it up as you go along people, which I think could potentially represent Isayama and Gege, but it's a little bit unclear. And then some more of the stuff that I talked about how they critique the societies that they're discussing, I think would be a lot of fun. And also talking about intertextuality versus a self-contained kind of argument. I think every detail that you need to know about AOT to understand the story happens within the confines of AOT. But one of the things that trips people up about JJK is that JJK leans on references to Japanese culture and little details about the Japanese political system that you just kind of have to know. Or, in my next video, it's coming very soon, the Hikari and Nobara Fight Club video. maybe a reference to popular movies or especially Buddhism to really get the full scope of what's going on in JJK. So different styles of writing that I think have their own unique merits. So I think that would be a fun video to do. And I would also make that video about Minecraft. That was the other part of it that I had planned. I was supposed to do a Minecraft server for this instead of a Pokemon Nuzlocke. I'm an idiot because that was going to lead into the video comparing the writing styles. And it was going to be a Minecraft thing. And I'm going to do a Pokemon Nuzlocke now. So that's what it is. I need to see if my capture card works before I get Minecraft footage because I don't have Minecraft on my computer. All right. That's information you don't need to know. Thank you so much for sticking it out to the end. I'm sure this has been a doozy to watch, as it has certainly been a doozy to make. Thank you for your patience over the last, period of time where I haven't put out any videos. It has all been in service of this video. Oh, last thing I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to mention that the album art for Season 4 Intro 1, which is my second favorite anime intro of all time, behind Intro 1 from Attack on Titan. So it's my 2 top spots. But the album cover art, Ymir as a child soldier, holy heartbreaking. This image gets me every time. So cool. I don't know why I wrote that into my script as something that I needed to mention, but fucking there you go. I guess that's my 2 cents on that album cover that you don't care about and don't care about my 2 cents on it. Whatever. I guess if you're here, you're probably at fucking work or something, and this is just playing in the background while you're talking to a customer. So I don't know. I love you guys. Thank you guys for always showing up and supporting my videos. This means the absolute world to me. I know I say it every time, but YouTube is my thing. It's my passion. I've always wanted to do it, and you guys are making that possible for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I will finally, at long last, see you in the next one, which will, with no more excuses and no more delays and no more pushing it back, be the Hikari and Nobara and Fight Club gender video in JJK. So thanks so much. This has been fun. Goodbye.